sometimes my issue isn't with the label itself, it's the fact that the label isn't delivering what it promises. If the enemies to lovers and it's just that he stole her fry in the 4th grade, what am I supposed to be doing with that? That is false advertising. That is not an enemy. Hello my lovies, I'm Lilian-Lee and welcome to my library. Before we get started with today, I must remind you of a few rules we have in this library. Number 1, please use your inside voices. Number 2, do be respectful to other library goers. And number 3, please remember to put back your books and materials where you found them. The penalty for this week, if you fail to do so, is you will have every single book you read for the next 10 years have its ending spoiled. And you don't want that. I don't want that. We don't want that, okay? So please put back the things where you found them. I am so excited for this week's episode because we are going to be discussing the topic, are tropes spoilers? And spoiler alert, I think they are. I was planning on doing a book review of Normal People by Sally Rooney this week, but I'm not finished with the book. So that will be next week's episode, guys. I promise. I'm so sorry. I know my thousands of fans were really waiting for that review, but unfortunately I'm not done with the book. So I decided to move up my schedule and do this week's topic episode. Now, if you are in the book space, whether it's on Bookstagram, BookTok, or what's the last one? BookTube? Yeah. Well, if you're on the online space of being a reader or wanting to be involved anything bookish, you will see some of the times that the topic of tropes being spoilers is discussed. But anytime you're looking for a book, tropes are definitely in the picture. So I thought it would just be interesting to dive into the root of tropes and how that can affect the reading experience, in that they might be spoilers. In order to unpack whether tropes are actually spoilers, we need to understand what a trope is first. So according to the Cambridge Dictionary, when referring to art or literature, a trope is something such as an idea, phrase, or image that is often used in a particular artist's work in a particular type of art in the media, etc. But if we look at it specifically for what a book trope is, we'll see that it is a type of plot or character that appears frequently across various book genres. So when we want to understand what a trope is, we're going to be using the definition of a book trope, or the fact that it appears across various genres, whether it be a character type or a plot point or anything along those lines. That's the definition we'll be working with today. Now with spoiler, we don't need to pull up the definition for that to get into specifics. It's the fact that something is spoiled for you. I know, I'm using the word in the definition, but I think that's something we can all agree on. If a plot point or anything along those lines is ruined for you, you are told about this before you can go into the experience yourself, that has been spoiled. So we're looking at today if tropes, these different character types or plot points or anything like that, if those, when used to sell books, are considered spoiling the experience of reading said books. And again, I do believe that to be true. So we've got a whole bunch of tropes when it comes to books. Some of the most famous ones we can name off the top of our heads are enemies to lovers, friends to lovers, miscommunication, chosen one, adventure plots, things like that. Those are specific plot points that are found across genres. You can see it in a YA or an adult book, maybe even a new adult book. You can see it in fantasy or literary fiction. Somewhere, somehow, there is a trope found in a book. Now, I see that tropes are used as marketing tools. And I think all of us really see it. Let's say we're opening up Book Talk. We want to look for recommendations for a good romance to read. You are going on vacation, you want a nice summer read, you'll look up romance books. Some of the first few videos you'll get is convincing you to read this enemies to lovers romance in 15 seconds. Or maybe just a video of like best enemies to romance books, and it just like shows you the covers of books, or here is a book review of this book and all it gives you is the tropes. Did anyone ever mention the plot when giving those reviews? No one was mentioning what the plot is about. So let's dive into that a bit deeper. In recent years, I would say especially since 2020, we have come to sell books in a vastly different way, and that relies on giving specifically what the reader is looking for these specific kinds of beats that they want to hit, and that's how we'll sell a book. Let's take a book off my shelf, for example. I'm taking Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood, and I'm just going to read you the blurb of the book. I'm going to tell you what the book is about by giving you that back of the book summary. Just gonna read the first part where it says, "The many lives of theoretical physicist Elsie Hanaway have finally caught up with her. By day, she's an adjunct professor, toiling away at grading labs and teaching thermodynamics in the hopes of landing tenure. By other day, Elsie makes up for her non-existent paycheck by offering her services as a fake girlfriend, tapping into the expertly honed people-pleasing skills to embody whichever version of herself the client needs." And it goes on to talk about how there is this man who is an experimental physicist who is cold-hearted and has ruined her mentor's career, but now he's the person standing in the way between her getting her dream job at MIT. And it tells you what the book is about. Now, if we were to explain that in, I hate to say it, but if we were to explain it in modern terms, in book talk terms, I would tell you straight off the bat, this is an enemies to lovers or academic rivals to lovers. It is a slow burn romance. He fell first and he fell harder maybe. It is, I think, a new term that's come up is STEMinist literature, since she's a woman in STEM. It's got like a whole bunch of tropes we can apply to it, but those are the ones that come off the top of my head. If I told you that something is a friends to lovers romance that is also a love triangle, and one of the guys is like the dark and brooding one, and the other guy is the sunshine golden retriever, and it can also be a situation of he fell first but maybe she fell harder, which book am I talking about? Oh, maybe some of you might be guessing The Summer I Turned Pretty. No, I'm talking about The Hunger Games. Did anyone maybe guess The Hunger Games? Because those are tropes that we like to attribute to that book, but that's not what the book is about. Like, those are themes in the book. Yes, that Katniss does sort of have like a love triangle between Gale and Peeta. Yes, it could be that Peeta and Gale fell for her first, but maybe she fell harder in the end when she actually ended up with one of them. But that's not what the book is about. So if we think about it, tropes are used as a marketing tool. They're used to sell you a book. If you hear that a book is enemies to lovers and you enjoy reading books where enemies become lovers, you will want to know more about that book. Sometimes knowing more about that book isn't knowing about the plot. That's wanting to know what the other tropes are and then just going into the book. So I see the tropification of books as a safety net. If you know that a book has certain tropes that you enjoy, you'll know you'll read it. If it has tropes you don't enjoy, you'll want to stay away from it because those tropes have delivered you a reading experience before that you didn't enjoy. If I'm going through Bookstagram to get some good recommendations and all I see is this is a friends to lovers romance with miscommunication and one bed trope and 3 chili peppers, and I've got the information of, oh, this is a book I like to read because I enjoy seeing these things in books, but what exactly is this book about? Can I get a little bit more information? And maybe, yes, it is of the reader's agency. It is up to you to go find out what the book is about. Maybe it's even your responsibility. But if you are maybe a publisher, why on earth are you just telling me the tropes? Would you like to tell me what the book is about, please? Now, with the fact that we're getting tropes instead of what the actual book is about, it could, in essence, spoil the experience for you. If you were to read something like Love Theoretically, a book I've got here on my shelf, if I went into that book knowing it's an enemies to lovers, it does spoil the book for me, knowing, okay, who is it the main character isn't exactly friends with right now? And it's only one guy in this book. Of course they're going to end up together. It's spoiled the end for you, essentially. If it's enemies to lovers, friends to lovers, rivals to lovers, you know whoever they're having some kind of conflict with or anything like that, that's who they end up with. And yeah, that's like a tried and true method. The person you're having the most interactions with in that book, that's who they end up with. But going into the experience knowing whoever is this enemy is the one you're ending up with, like, babes, give me a little bit more than that. So tropes are a marketing tool now. They're used to hook people in, but I feel like they've sort of gone overboard. You're sacrificing your big plot points to reel people in. So if I find out that this is an enemies to lovers romance, you must know that they'll start off as hating each other and go through this arc to being friendly with each other and then eventually fall in love. And that arc is actually a huge part of the book. Maybe because of the tropes, we're not really told of how this will happen. That can be how the experience can be different. Maybe that's not entirely a spoiler because we don't know what the experience will be like. But it's still the fact that you have sacrificed that whole crux of the book by giving it to us as marketing. That is sort of what I'm not okay with. Just tell me what the book is about. Even if it will be a 1-minute video on TikTok explaining the review, I would prefer that than just seeing the trope of the book. Yes, it's faster to explain to me the tropes. Yes, it is saving my time to know what the tropes are before going in. But it would still be nice to know what the book is about. I've also realized that, yeah, tropes are used as a sense of security. If you find that in previous times you've read a book and you've really enjoyed it, and you've noticed these are themes that were presented in the book, you read another book, you really enjoy it, the same themes are across it. I love reading books that are childhood friends to lovers. Yeah, I'm going to use the trope version since that's what we're talking about right now. I love a childhood friends to lovers romance. I love the idea that two people can know each other so well as friends and eventually get to that point where they can be in a relationship. Those are my favorite stories to read. So in the past, if I had read a story where two friends end up being in a relationship, and these are books I have consumed and I've ended up enjoying them every time, I'm going to start seeing a pattern in my life that these are the kinds of books that I'll enjoy versus maybe, I do like enemies to lovers, but I'll use an example, but versus an enemies to lovers book. If I totally despise books where these two people hate each other and end up in a relationship, I'll maybe think it's unrealistic or something like that, then I'll avoid those books. But hey, your girl loves a good enemies to lovers, guys. Don't get me wrong. I just need an example. So that is what tropes tend to offer people, a sense of familiarity, that sense of security, and knowing that previous experiences, when you're reading a good book, you've noticed these themes. If you see that theme come up in any new books in your life, you'll know that this is something you will likely enjoy. But it goes down to the fact again that tropes are spoiling that experience for you. So yeah, you're having that familiar experience that these two people will end up being lovers, that there will be miscommunication in this book, that there's going to be a point in the book where there's only one bed and the main characters have to share the bed. Wouldn't it be lovely if they shared a book? There will be a point in the book where the man will be like, "Who did this to you?" to the female main character after a fight. You'll know that that's what you'll get going into the book. And so is your experience not spoiled? I mean, it's an experience you enjoy that you'll always tend to like because it's proven time and time again that you do enjoy it. But now you know that when you go into this book, that's what you're going to get. So where's the sense of surprise anymore? Where's the actual experience of going through the book and enjoying it, not just going through the book and expecting these things to happen? And it is something to also mention that knowing the tropes help us not waste our time. That's a side of the side of the argument that we should be raising, that we live in a very fast-paced world and we're really busy people all the time. We don't have the time nor the energy to read books we don't enjoy. I do like to read trash books every now and then just for the thrill of it, but that's not everyone. So finding out the trope of the book also lets you know that if this book includes tropes you don't enjoy, then this isn't a book that you'll read. For me, I'm not the hugest fan of mafia books. I will enjoy them time to time, but I won't read them the same way I read A Friends to Lovers. I won't read them as regularly. So if I read the back of a book and it doesn't blatantly say anything about the mafia or tropes along those lines, I will read the book and pick it up. But when I get maybe 20% through the book, or maybe even less, and I start to see that there's mafia themes included, I'll be like, oh, okay. They didn't mention it on the back, but this is what's happening. But it's fine, I'll continue reading it. And I get to the end, maybe I liked the book, maybe I didn't. And yeah, maybe I waste my time, maybe I didn't, but sometimes it happens. So you could say knowing the tropes help you not waste your time on a book that you'll DNF by like 2% already, or a book that you won't enjoy, and so you could have spent that time reading other books instead. Your opportunity cost, you could have read a better book, but instead you were reading this trash book. So we could say that is part of the other argument. But for me, I would say that reading the summary of a book and going into that book is a lot better than getting the tropes of that book. Again, I know it offers that sense of familiarity, but it is better to just sometimes look at what the description says and read the book and see maybe it's a different experience. Like I said, sometimes I might read a mafia book and I don't like it. Sometimes I do actually like it, but that's based on the experience of the book itself, the actual contents of the book. The trope can tell you one thing, but it's not telling you the full picture. Like I said earlier, I was describing The Hunger Games, but it sounded like it could be any other romance book in existence. So the tropes never tell you the full story. If I see that a mafia book has these specific tropes, it would be, I don't want to read this. But maybe if I go into actually reading the book, the tropes might be a different experience to what I'm having experienced in the book. So sometimes the trope and the story don't add up. Let's use The Hunger Games again, for example. There is a love triangle in that book. We've got Katniss, Peeta, and Gale. But arguably, the love triangle, not even arguably, most definitely, the love triangle isn't the essential plot of the book. If I were to tell someone, yeah, The Hunger Games is a really good love triangle, and he's one of the guys has been in love with her for forever, and you would think that it's a romance book, and like, why is it called Hunger Games then? Are they hungry for each other? What? But if you were to read the book, you would see that the romance is not what Suzanne Collins is wanting us to take away from that book. What she wants us to take away is a comment on society, especially when it comes to capitalism and exploiting the working class. And that exploitation can also be seen by the fact that these districts have to sacrifice their children in order to keep on living to see another day, even though those children die through it. We see that because of a war that was fought years ago, the upper class makes the lower class sacrifice their children and live lower lives, except for the districts that are like closer to the capital. What is it, 1, 2, and 4? But even still, they're not seen as the same as the capital. The class system in the Hunger Games is very, very well detailed, well explored across all the books. The love triangle is a very small thing in comparison to what the overall themes are in the book. But again, if I were to tell you that The Hunger Games is a love triangle, it's not only spoiling the fact that, okay, there will be some kind of love triangle in the book, even though it's a small thing, but it's also not telling you the full picture of the story. So only using tropes to want to read a book can lead you away from experiencing good books, because your tropes won't tell you the full picture. But sometimes those tropes do end up telling you the full picture. They tell you from like start to finish what ends up in the book, especially because of the fact, and this is my next point, that the tropification of books has led books to significantly decline in quality. So I spoke about this briefly in my reacting to unpopular bookish opinions, but Because we want books so quickly and we want books that are very specific. You want an enemies to lovers, romantasy, something along those lines. Because we are churning out these books so quickly, according to these tropes that are becoming popular, the plot is sacrificed. The quality of writing, oh, it's interesting. It really is. And so the quality of a book is no longer important. What matters is that it has these tropes. I'm not going to name this book, but there was a book I read a while ago where, if I were to use it in trope terms, when I still really, really cared about tropes about a year ago, it was enemies to lovers, white shoes. It was a retelling of sorts, and I think it's supposed to be like a chosen girl trope, chosen one trope, yeah. And there was something else that I'm forgetting, but like those are the main plot points, well, tropes of the book, and when you read it, that ends up being the main plot points. But the problem is there was no plot to back that up. So it's as if the author was just giving you these things because she knows that that's what people want to read. Of course the girlies will appreciate enemies to lovers, white shoes, and like the guys are like brooding and cool and like, we're in love. But the book made zero sense. The quality was abysmal. They were doing anything to make sure that those tropes were delivered. Absolutely anything. So not only are the tropes spoiling the experience for the book, especially when it comes to a white shoes, that tells you that the main character will end up with all of the love interests present, whether it be 2, 3, 4, how many. That spoils it exponentially. But also the fact that the writing was just poor. It was not a good experience. So we're sacrificing the quality of books in order to hit these marks that the tropes are promising to deliver you. And we're eating that up. I ate it up in the beginning, but then I'm like, this is the worst book I've ever read. Again, I can't say which book it is because I don't want to sound mean, but it was really bad. But it goes back to my point that your tropes are spoiling what happens in the book, because those are the major parts of the book. But then it also ends up being a lot of books are sacrificing the writing quality, the plot quality, the character development, because all that matters at the end of the day is that these tropes are present. And if these tropes are present, people want to read them, people want to buy them. Let's take a romantasy, for example. We've got Fourth Wing and all the other books in the series. We've got Powerless, we've got Akatar, we've got so many romantasy books. And when you hear enemies to lovers, you're like, ooh, I'm in. When you hear Chosen One, you're like, ooh, I'm in. When you hear Shadow Daddy, you're like, ooh, I'm in. What are these books about though? Finding out those tropes makes you want to read the stories. And with those tropes, you do end up knowing that, okay, yeah, this male main character will end up having shadow powers, which is present in 2 of the 3 books I mentioned. You will end up knowing, yeah, these 2 are gonna end up lovers. If not at the end of the first book, maybe the second, but at some point they're gonna be together. So you know what to expect, which to some can be a really good thing, and for me can end up being a spoiler. And maybe these are the kinds of books where your experience is maybe different. Maybe the tropes and the writing are a bit different, but not too much. With these books, it wasn't exactly that the writing was sacrificed in order to deliver the tropes, but it just was that the tropes did matter a little bit more than the story itself. And people do end up wanting the tropes a little bit more than the story themselves. And I think it is an important thing to mention that tropes have been around for a long time. This tropification of books hasn't just existed with TikTok. I mean, it's blown up a lot online because of Book Talk and all those other spaces, but for all my fanfiction girlies out there, we've been here before. We've played these games before. In fan fiction, you already know the world. You already know the characters. You know the original source material, because that's what fan fiction is. It's taking some original work, maybe it takes a couple characters and puts them in a different setting, expands the story in a way that people might find of interest. It turns the story around for fans, you know? It is a different way of experiencing that piece of media, that piece of art, literature, anything like that. And because you already know what to expect from these characters or themes that are prevalent in the book, the things that you will look for are what are the tropes. What is it that is different from the original source material? So if you were to go on like Wattpad or AO3, you would see tags upon tags. We didn't call them tropes back then, we called them tags. So if you saw hashtag enemies, hashtag lovers, hashtag office romance, hashtag boss, hashtag university life, maybe the characters have been aged up from high school to college, so it's turned from a YA to an adult. Maybe it's it was originally an office romance in its original piece of literature, and now we're just expanding on the relationships past that. So it takes what was the original work and adds onto it as a fan of that literature. And so the tags would tell you exactly what you can expect. That is the further add-on. So you know from the original piece of work what the characters were like. You read the story or watched the movie, anything that was already developed. But now we're in this new space, this new writer. And so what they are delivering you are the add-ons. And the add-ons tended to be those tags that they mentioned, which of course are the tropes. And so that also spoiled the experience for you. But you already know what the original story was. You already know what the original media was telling you. But now the tags tell you what is the extra bits that I can expect here. Why must I read this piece of fan fiction if I already have the original material? I know I want to spend extra time with these characters, but how is this book changing that extra time with these characters? Is it maybe turned from a contemporary to a fantasy world? Have the characters been aged up? Is it a more romantic in a sense? Is it more interactive? I don't know if you guys remember the YN days. So you're asking yourselves these questions. Why should I read this piece of fanfic? And the tags would tell you exactly why you need to read these pieces of fanfic. And the tags would exactly spoil that experience for you. But through that spoiler, you end up wanting to read the book. So sometimes I guess the spoils aren't bad, but they still are spoilers, okay? It's maybe not going to like warn you away from reading the book, but like with all the points I've mentioned, it still is a spoiler. So yeah, tropes are a normalized way of spoiling. We've gotten so used to seeing tropes as a way for us to know whether we want to read this book or not, that we've really just accepted this form, but they are still spoilers at the end of the day. The degrees will change depending on the book, but it is still spoiling pieces of the experience. If it says the enemies will become lovers, it's taken away that expectation for you. You're no longer thinking, will they or won't they? Oh, babes, they will. When we marketed the book to you, we told you they will. So it's spoiling in a sense. But what I do enjoy sometimes is when some books will tell you what the tropes are, but the experience is vastly different from what you're thinking in a really good way. An example I want to use is Sunrise on the Reaping. So Suzanne Collins' Sunrise on the Reaping is her latest book in the Hunger Games series, and it's the prequel book to the Hunger Games universe. So you could consider this book, it's not like book 1 or anything, so it's 0.5. I guess that's how it is on Goodreads, if I remember right. So this explains the 50th Hunger Games, I think it was. It was one of the Quarter Quells, so I think it's the 50th Hunger Games. And that was the games where the number of tributes were doubled. So instead of the normal 12 boys, 12 girls from each district giving us our 24 tributes, we ended up with 48 tributes. And when you go into reading Sunrise on the Reaping, there are two things that we know. Firstly, from the original Hunger Games trilogy, we knew that these games were different. We knew that the 50th Hunger Games was when all the tributes were doubled, meaning that 47 people died and only one victor was the person who came out alive. And that victor happened to be Hamish Abernethy. This is not a spoiler at all, what I'm communicating, because this is something that is just logical thinking. If Katniss and Peter's mentor is Hamish, and we were told that District 12 has only had one victor in history, and the man training them can only be a victor, of course, that is the man who won the Hunger Games. So from the original Hunger Games trilogy, we know going into Sunrise and the Reaping that this was what the 50th games were. It was 48 people and Hamish was the one who lived. Now, the second thing we know going into Sunrise on the Reaping is the fact that everyone dies. But this is different to what we know from the original Hunger Games trilogy. But when you go into Sunrise and the Reaping, every single person that you meet in the games through Hamish, you know that this person is going to die. And that's what is so crazy of an experience. The fact that it's already spoiled for you. By the nature of the Hunger Games, you do know that everyone has to die. That's just what it is. But when you're reading the book and you're like meeting everyone and you're encountering all these different tributes and you're like, oh my days, you are going to die. I don't have a lot of time with you. Like the time I have with you is dwindling very, very quickly. You know these people are going to die. But what Suzanne Collins did so beautifully is she made the experience memorable. The experience you had with these characters. Even though you go into these books knowing how it ends, she made sure that spoiler didn't spoil your experience. Oh, did you see what I did there? Yeah, you clock it, yeah. So you go into Sunrise on the Reaping knowing that Hamish lost everyone he cares about. Because Katniss mentioned it in her book that Hamish had nobody left. Everyone he cared about is gone. You go into his book knowing that quarter quell had double the tributes, double the losses, and Hamish was the only one to survive. And when you're reading that book, every character you encounter, you know that they're going to die. But it was written in a way that it didn't feel like you knew that everyone was going to die, in a sense. You read that book with a very different experience to what was promised, but in a very good way. So sometimes the tropes can be a bit misleading. The trope can promise you one thing, so I guess the theme that everybody dies. But when you read the book, the writing quality is so good that the trope didn't even spoil a thing for you. When I read Sunrise on the Reaping, I didn't expect to ugly cry the way I did. I cried for, I think it was the last 50 pages of the book. I cried nonstop. I could not stop crying. But the problem is I knew what was going to happen. Everybody knew what was going to happen. Anyone who knew a thing about the Hunger Games, a thing about Hamish, a thing about that quarter quell, you knew exactly what was going to happen. But why was I crying? Because the book was so well written that it didn't matter that I was spoiled. It didn't matter that I went into that book knowing how it ended, because the writing was so good, the overall reading experience was so good that it topped the experience of spoilers. And so sometimes you will have books that are spoiled in a sense, like you know exactly what to expect, but at least the writing quality is good. And then you have those books where the writing quality is bad. So sometimes they'll tell you, oh, they're enemies to lovers, but the writing quality is so bad that all it is enemies to lovers, and there's like no development whatsoever. And that's just what happens. And it's also good to mention that sometimes people use tropes in the most incorrect ways. Let's take The Cruel Prince. When I was recommended that book, I was told it's an enemies to lovers. Excuse me? That's not what that book is about either. It's like the way we talk about the Hunger Games sometimes being a love triangle. No, that's false marketing. Let's stop that right now. Same with The Cruel Prince. That is not an enemies to lovers romance. That book is a political drama at the very center of it. Like, it is heavy on its political themes of war and, the the kingdom dynamics, it was very heavy in its political nature. The romance, it was a small little side piece. It was a nibble that we had, but it wasn't the whole dish, okay? So when we market the Cruel Princess and Enemies to Lovers, and you go into that book with it's good writing, good plot, but the plot isn't Enemies to Lovers, so you end up being disappointed. And then the second and third books, it's a little bit more romance, but again, it's not the full book. That's not what the book is about. So yeah, sometimes you have those experiences. But to close off, what I'm getting to is the fact that tropes can be considered spoilers. They are a form of spoiling the book. Sometimes they blatantly just tell you what happens, and you go into the book and the experience has been ruined for you. You know exactly what has happened now. It's not good no more. Like a Why Choose Romance, you know exactly what's going to happen at the end. Other books, you can get those tropes and it can be a good reading experience, it could be a bad reading experience. Other books, you will get those tropes and it doesn't even like compare to what happens in the book. It can be an absolutely different experience because the writing quality is so good. The tropes or the spoilers that you encounter don't even matter. So essentially what I'm saying is there's layers to this. There are many layers to tropes and how they impact reading. But to answer our question, I think tropes are spoilers. That's just me. But that brings us to the end of our discussion because unfortunately the library is closing shop for the day. But on your way out, please feel free to leave a like, subscribe or follow and comment what is your favorite trope. I know we had a whole discussion on them being spoilers, but don't say what the trope is and the book. Just say what's your favorite trope. Just say what you enjoy seeing in books. I'd really love to know. For me, I love a good friends to lovers and an enemies to lovers. So please comment down below and let me know. And I will remind you to please put back your books and materials where you found them, or you will face every book you read for the next 10 years have its ending spoiled. And not a Hunger Games kind of spoil with Sunrise on the Reaping where at least it was still a good experience nonetheless. Nah. You won't even have a good experience. All of it will just be bad because your ending was spoiled. So if you don't want that, return those books back where you found them, okay? You got 30 minutes. Thank you so much for joining me today in the library, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care.